The next panel is going to start. Thank you. I'm going to put that here. S'il vous plaît, merci de vous asseoir. Merci. On va commencer parce qu'on a des travaux extrêmement denses cet après-midi. Merci. Thank you. Thank you very much. OK. Merci. Donc, je voulais juste vraiment passer immédiatement la parole à Marie Quelles, qui va présenter ses invités, et juste vous dire à propos de Marie, donc la présenter, que c'est une personne que j'ai connue alors qu'elle était la conseillère en fait de Mike Pompeo en 2020, et donc Marie est devenue une amie proche. On discute, on débat. C'est une spécialiste de politique étrangère hors pair, et elle a accepté, après être venue à Tocqueville l'an dernier en tant que speaker, de modérer cette année. C'est d'ailleurs un des principes de nos conversations, c'est de créer peu à peu une sorte de famille, de cercle en fait, des soutiens et des habitués de Tocqueville, pour donner peu à peu un esprit, un climat particulier à cette discussion, cette délibération démocratique, même quand nous sommes d'ailleurs d'avis très différents sur les sujets que nous traitons. Donc Mary, merci beaucoup, et you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Laure. And I just want to start by thanking the Tocqueville family, thanking all of the foundations, the supporters who make this day possible, and thanking you, the audience who is here in person, and also our very significant online audience. We appreciate all of you being here and showing your interest in these very important topics. So the last panel examined Putin and the situation within Russia itself. Now we're going to look to the West and inside Europe, the United States, the free world, and where we went wrong. Hindsight is 20/20, but it is very remarkable just how wrong we got Putin when the signs were so obvious. Whether it was the human rights violations within Russia, whether it was his violation of the borders of other sovereign nations, whether it was his facilitation of the use of weapons of mass destruction in Syria, and even inside the borders of Britain, the assassination campaigns that we've seen in multiple countries, the blatant violations of arms control treaties. I'm thinking of the INF Treaty, the no-holds-barred relationship with communist China. There have been many signs, and yet we didn't see them, and now we have a war in Europe. I'm extremely honored to introduce a remarkable panel today. Lithuanian Foreign Minister with us, Landesbergis. Mr. Minister, welcome. Of course, to my right, the Honorable Monsieur Hubert Védrine, former Foreign Minister of France. And we have online, I'm told, Stephanie Babst, former head of NATO's Strategic Foresight Team, now with Bruch Associates. So thank you all for joining. We're going to begin today with opening statements, then we'll have a vigorous debate because we have many points of view on this panel, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So that's how we'll start. Maybe I'll start to my left, Minister, with you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it's a great pleasure and honor for the first time to represent Lithuania here in this event. I'm very hopeful that it's not the last one. And I won't say something so offending that you will not invite Lithuanians for next time. Probably the main question that I personally been asked after the war broke out in February 24th by the media and in numerous conferences was, how do you feel that you were not listened for those 30 years that you've been telling exactly the same things? For the first month, I can tell you that the feeling was really good. We had all the chance to explain, we told you so. and then it changed. And now it's much more difficult to talk about this because the mood has changed by whoever is asking, and actually we have to start thinking about the future. Not just why we are in the situation where we are, but also how not to repeat, that we would not find ourselves in something similar, and maybe much sooner than 30 years in the future. But still, I would try to divide my answer to this hypothetical question that I have not received yet here, but into two parts. First part, just to give you a probable answer by a Lithuanian coming from the almost very close to the front from where the war is happening. What was the mood in Lithuania when it comes to Russia? How did we feel? And I found an answer in one of the books that I recently had a chance to read. Is by Timothy Snyder. Maybe you've read that as well. It's Black Lands. And he was presenting Second World War not as just German occupation war, but also as a last colonial war. And Germany as a colonial power who did not have a chance to have colonies and was seeing parts of Eastern Europe, big parts of Western Europe, and also Russia as the potential land for its colonization. And everything that comes out of it, with exterminations and occupations and the whole war as a colonial war. And honestly, I can tell you now today that for 30 years, Lithuania and Lithuanians, politicians and people alike, have been seeing Russia as a last colonial power that has not yet seized an idea of having some of its colonies back. A lot of already has been said by previous panelists, and I would not repeat that because an analysis is sound. But what we're seeing currently is a colonial imperialistic mentality that is being shown itself and manifests itself. And we felt that because we still believed that there was a lot of luck factor that we gained our independence 30 years ago. And we've never put our eyes off the possibility that Russia one day might want to seize its colonies back, seeing us also as a part of its what is called a territory. Gary was speaking a lot about what Putin already said. But we have a benefit of hindsight. And yes, some of us, Gary was one of those, who speaks not only from the hindsight, but also he spoke when the things were happening. But we're just covered part of when it comes to Ukraine. There are a lot of signals already in the public when it comes to the Baltic states or Poland. Russia is a menacing neighbor. It uses menacing words and phrases when it comes to countries in the Baltic. So I would not like to find ourselves again in a situation where 5-10 years in the future, where we would have to say, look, this was in the public. There were signals. He was saying that these territories belonged in Soviet Union, blah, 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 and all that, and maybe some of those states are not supposed to be independent and all that. So this was the mood for 30 years. It is a mood now. So you would not have, you would have quite a difficult job if you were to find an extremely surprised person in any of the Baltic states or Poland that would say, okay, we do not know how we got there. We know. We've seen that, we know that, we've allowed that to fester, and now we have results. Now the main question is, how do we not allow that to happen again in the future? And that's probably where I have to say, look, we made a mistake once. The Baltics have warned the people in the West that this might become a problem, that Russia is an imperialistic country with colonialistic tendencies. And So please, let's not make a mistake once again. Now it's time to listen to the Baltics, truly. And honestly, I still don't believe that this is actually what is happening. As I mentioned before, for the first month after the war, it was a very nice month, truly, a honeymoon for any politician working in foreign policy. Now it's over. And we've seen that for the last 3 months in several cases. One case which solved itself quite fast, but still is solving, it was the energy independence. We've been telling, and again we've been telling even after the war started, that Russia uses energy as a weapon against the West. Immediately we need to find ways how to decouple from Russian energy sources. There has to be a strategic approach to this. Secondly, this discussion that we had a discussion that ended just not full 2 weeks ago in Madrid about defense of the eastern flank. We have to understand that where we are coming from, we truly want to see a very clear messages, well, not just the political messages, but actual practical points, that the countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland would be practically defended if it came to any provocations or even war. Honestly, the discussion was not the most easiest one. Almost up to the last point, up to the last day in Madrid, we were not sure how and what kind of decisions will be made in Madrid. So honestly, I think that this is still not decided. And practically, I understand that it is very difficult to switch so fast, even when we're talking about energy, when we're talking about all kinds of dependencies, when we're talking about actual defense, because in essence, what we are asking, what the Baltics are asking, is to go back to the certain mentality of the Cold War, where the borders will be defended, where even the most difficult to defend territories like West Berlin, which kind of we feel similar emotion, will be defended with all the practical means, soldiers, anti-missile, anti-rocket defense, air defense, all that. And we did not have that for 30 years in the West. And lastly, probably what the message you would hear from the Baltics is that let's not make a similar mistake working with other non-democratic authoritarian countries in the world. Because the dependencies, such as the energy dependency on Russia, are built every day and even strengthened as we speak on other actors, other global actors. And again, I would not like to sit in the conference 30 years or even less than that in the future and say, look, we've been there. And for the first time, well, it was on us, probably on all of us. But if we do the same mistake, well, it would be much more difficult to explain why we stepped into the similar shoes.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just had a hint how to answer the question of why we were strategically blind. The minister has hinted at it. Maybe it had to do with cheap energy. We're going to go next to online to Ms. Stephanie Babst, or Dr. Babst, my apologies. Over to you for your opening statement. Can we hear in the audience? Do we have audio, please?
Yes, I just said hello to you all in Tocqueville, and thank you very much for your introduction. I'm very sad that I won't be able to join you in person, but due to the corona pandemic here in Germany, I was obliged to stay at home. But nevertheless, I feel very much privileged to share some of my thoughts with you on the subject. I had the privilege to lead NATO's strategic foresight team for the past 8 years, and had obviously some effort on, say, in terms of trying to ease what was called strategic blindness. But let me give you just a couple of lines on three questions. And the first question is why, as the minister already elaborated on, why did we get into this catastrophe? And I would say that recalling the 23 February timeframe, it was very, very clear to me that all signs were on the wall. We all saw, as you said, Russia's military buildup. We all observed the various exercises, large scale in our neighborhood. We condemned Russia's cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. And yes, I mean, those who wanted could also read President Putin's sick fantasies about subjugating Ukraine, which by that I mean his historical quote-unquote analysis that he published in July last year. It was a public document. Everybody could read it, who was interesting. But overall, as we know, Western leaders chose to ignore these signs. And I think partly the reason was that NATO decided collectively to basically stick to the dual track policy, which it has adopted post-2014, which was strengthening NATO's defense and deterrence on the one hand side, but keeping the door open to dialogue. And the dialogue part of that dual track approach didn't work at all, in my opinion. There was hardly any type of meaningful conversations with the Russians, simply because the Russians made very clear that they weren't interested to have a meaningful conversation with us on be it arms control or be it military risk reduction or be it other issues. But I think some of our countries, including my own, namely Germany, made things even worse because they put a very, very blind eye on our energy dependencies, and they regarded Russia still as a partner of strategic choice. And to make even things worse, let me just recap that also. A number of European countries thought it was a good idea to stick to armament contracts signed with Moscow pre-2014 and continued to send military equipment and hardware to Russia. And some of those capabilities that were sent by my country, by Italy, by France, and by others are actually those capabilities that the Russians are using now in their combat against Ukraine. So from my point of view, what matters strategically is that the alliance collectively was neither able to deter Russia, nor were we able to prevent Russia from launching this full-scale invasion through diplomatic and crisis prevention efforts, nor through appeals. And that ultimately is a very bitter lessons learned for us to take. Now, I mean, since the Madrid summit, and I looked at the summit deliverables very, very closely, NATO has, as the minister just said, adopted, not really surprisingly, but a very, very strong posture in terms of we will continue to enhance our deterrence and defense, and we will do this really in a very, very meaningful way, up to 300,000 combat-ready, rapid deployable troops. This is obviously a good and logical step to do, but on the other side, what I'm personally quite unhappy about is that the alliance took very little and very concrete decisions to allow itself to ultimately shape the course of action in Ukraine itself and in the neighborhood. Because ever since the war broke out, NATO has adopted what I call a fortress NATO attitude by listing basically the things that the alliance is not prepared to do. No no-fly zone, no humanitarian corridor, no maritime operation to unblock the maritime embargo in the Black Sea, and not even a coordination role for NATO to improve the supplies of military equipment and training to Kiev. The last thing, as we all know, was outsourced to the so-called contact group in Ramstein. Okay, you can do this, but if I look more or less at what NATO's concrete role in terms of really helping Ukraine to master this immense challenge is, I find it rather limited. It's true, and we can talk about this also, that the individual allies' military supplies of equipment and heavy weapons, of humanitarian assistance and financial assistance is all very good, and it's more than needed. But also here, I would critically point out that one particular aspect is missing. And this is to have, among the allies, a debate of what I would call the strategic, political, and ultimately also military end state. What is it that we ultimately collectively want to achieve in close tandem in support of Ukraine? Obviously, the situation on the battlefield is very fluid, and it's my assumption that we're going to see many more months, probably even years, where the situation will remain very fluid. So I think we need to start operating intellectually, politically, and also in planning terms, in terms of contingencies. We need to think about contingencies, and we need to sit down with our Ukrainian partners and actually talk about these contingencies. My last assumption, and then I really shut up here, but when I look at the weeks and months ahead, I would assume at least that President Putin will likely try to declare victory over the Donbas region anytime soon as he has military conquered the Donbas region, or rather Donetsk as well. He has already started to make preparations for illegal referenda, and most likely he will declare at some point in time, in the not too distant future, that these territories, probably also territories in the south, including Kherson and Mariupol, will become part of the Russian Federation. If this is going to happen, this will provide the war with another dynamic and will put us to another challenge, how to respond to that from a political point of view, but also from a legal point of view. And related to that is my last assumption that even if this scenario is likely to happen, it will not mean the end of the war, because President Putin, with in all likelihood, will go for the destruction of the entire Ukraine and will not stop at the current borderline. So my plaidoyer, very clearly and loudly, is for us to design a comprehensive and long-term containment strategy. And yes, I agree very much with the Lithuanian foreign minister. We need to go back to the books of the Cold War, but adapt them to a globalized 21st century challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So now we're adding to our list. You heard energy dependence, which, if you think about it, means that we wanted cheap energy and now we're paying for it at the expense of millions of people's lives who have fled or are now dead. And in terms of international institutions, at best case, a dual-track NATO strategy was naive, a lesson we can also take with communist China. We're pursuing the same strategy. Or at worst, we have deep bureaucratic rot, and we have an institution that is ineffective. So now we're adding to our list the anatomy of how this happened. Mr. Minister, over to you.
Merci. Merci. Vous m'entendez? Alors, j'ai un point de vue qui est un peu différent, qui n'est pas forcément contradictoire, mais qui est différent. D'abord, je trouve très très utile qu'on réfléchisse sur l'anatomie d'un aveuglement. C'est comme les militaires qui font des analyses de retour d'expérience, et c'est très important. Mais comment définit-on l'aveuglement? Alors, tel que c'est parti, tel que c'est présenté, il y a un seul aveuglement. C'est l'aveuglement de l'Occident qui n'a pas compris, pour des tas de raisons, que Poutine était ce que l'on dit maintenant. Donc tout était écrit. Tout le monde a vu Laurence d'Arabie ici, le film. Je ne sais pas si vous vous rappelez d'un échange entre Peter O'Toole et Omar Sharif, dans lequel Omar Sharif dit tout est écrit, parce qu'il y a un gars qui est mort dans le désert. Non, tout n'est pas écrit. Et c'est le volontarisme occidental. Bon, alors ne partons pas de l'idée que tout était écrit. Et moi, je préconise que pour faire l'anatomie, on remonte assez loin en arrière, je ne vais pas remonter plusieurs siècles, à la fin de l'URSS, Gorbatchev, mais je ne vais pas développer, et en tout cas depuis la Russie, donc depuis le début des années 90. Et si on veut travailler sérieusement pour l'avenir, pour notre sécurité, il faut étudier sérieusement la politique occidentale pendant Yeltsin, pendant Poutine 1, 2, Medvedev, après on arrive au moment où les choses basculent vraiment. Et à l'époque, alors on pourrait énumérer, mais on n'a pas assez le temps, il faudrait étudier la politique des conseillers américains dans les gouvernements à l'époque de Yeltsin, donc l'encouragement à la thérapie de choc, et il faudrait étudier les décisions stratégiques sur la localisation des antimissiles, par exemple, les ouvertures, en effet, à l'époque de l'OTAN, mais qui, à mon avis, relève de la verroterie diplomatique, en quelque sorte, donc toute une série de domaines dans ces années-là. Il faudrait évaluer pour savoir ce qui était utile, pas utile, illusoire, etc. Je rappelle qu'aux États-Unis, il y a eu un changement majeur dans les positions sur ces questions entre les vétérans de la guerre froide, Kissinger, Brzezinski, Matlock, Kennan, etc., et plusieurs autres qui avaient combattu l'URSS toute leur vie, combattu le communisme toute leur vie, et qui ont été très réticents dans l'époque triomphaliste. L'époque triomphaliste, c'est à partir de la fin de l'URSS, on a gagné. On a gagné. Avec toutes sortes de conséquences, pas que sur la Russie. Et moi, j'ai cherché à comprendre depuis l'horrible guerre en Ukraine, horrible sur le plan humain et complètement aberrante d'un point de vue russe même. Bon. J'ai cherché à comprendre est-ce qu'il y avait un lien dans les attitudes occidentales pendant ces 30 années. On parle de 30 années, hein. On ne parle pas simplement des 2 dernières années. Et le lien, à mon avis, c'est l'attitude olympienne. L'Occident a gagné, c'est la fin de l'histoire, ce que j'avais appelé l'hyperpuissance, mais c'est aussi l'hubris. On a gagné. Ce que ressentent les Russes, on s'en fiche totalement. Ils se prétendent humiliés, c'est ridicule, c'est pas important. Ils sont furieux, c'est pas grave. Ils veulent se venger, c'est pas grave. Ils sont menaçants, ils ne le feront pas, ils n'y arriveront pas. Donc le point commun bizarre entre l'époque, à mon avis, où on n'a pas été assez inclusif, on n'a pas réussi à emmailloter la Russie dans un système européen de sécurité. Je sais que ça aurait été très, très, très difficile. Enfin, on n'a même pas essayé, en fait. Et la suite, on n'a pas été assez dissuasif. On n'a pas été assez ferme. Il y a même eu des signaux contraires, d'ambiguïté, les réflexions du président Trump sur l'article 5. Donc l'élément commun, c'est, de toute façon, ce n'est pas important. La Russie était devenue, ce que disait Obama, d'ailleurs, une sorte de puissance régionale de second rang, qui avait gardé une sorte de puissance de nuisance locale. C'est ça le point commun. Et moi, je voudrais contribuer à notre réflexion en disant que ce n'est pas que par rapport à la Russie qu'on a réagi comme ça. Parce que du point de vue occidental, ce que pensent les gens au Moyen-Orient, on s'en fiche. Le Sud, les Africains, on s'en fiche totalement. Et les Chinois, même chose. Vous avez fait allusion d'un mot à la Chine. Les Chinois, on va les mettre dans l'OMC. Ils ne respectent aucune règle, propriété intellectuelle, etc. On va les mettre dans l'OMC. Ils vont se développer, ils vont s'enrichir, et donc, ils vont se démocratiser. C'est exactement le même raisonnement que l'idée que d'acheter beaucoup de gaz à la Russie. Ils sont dépendants après de leurs clients. C'est le même raisonnement. Ce n'est pas que sur la Russie. Ce n'est pas lié à une sorte de complaisance spécifique sur la Russie et sur Poutine, qui sont une sorte d'être satanique. Ce n'est pas lié qu'à ça. C'est lié à l'idée qu'on, de toute façon, on contrôle l'ensemble. Il y a une sorte d'américano-globalisation qui tient les règles. Et donc les Chinois vont aller dans le bon sens et les autres aussi. C'est l'ensemble qui n'a pas marché. Ce n'est pas que sur la Russie. Et donc je distingue bien les 2 périodes, mais si on veut vraiment évaluer pour faire face à d'autres événements dans le monde, il faut avoir le courage de revenir à ces sources-là. Et pas uniquement dire Poutine est atroce, comme il y a très très longtemps, on disait que Nasser était un nouvel Hitler et des bêtises comme ça. Non pas que Poutine ne soit pas effrayant, hein, mais il faut faire l'évaluation générale. Bon, ça c'est ma remarque principale qu'on pourrait détailler si on avait le temps, et qui concerne aussi bien une sorte d'aveuglement. Mais c'est notre aveuglement, pas sur Poutine. c'est notre aveuglement sur notre triomphe, sur notre domination. Et c'est la négligence pour the rest. Et tout ça, c'est fini. Ce n'est pas fini qu'avec la guerre en Ukraine. Regardez ce qu'a dit Biden au moment de la sortie d'Afghanistan, déjà actée par Trump en réalité. Donc c'est un échec total de toutes les politiques d'ingérence. Et autant l'intervention initiale en Afghanistan était nécessaire pour détruire Al-Qaïda, autant le fait de rester pour faire de l'Afghanistan un pays démocratique moderne était une illusion depuis le début. Est-ce que les Américains ont fait l'évaluation de la guerre en Irak en 2003? Non, pas vraiment. Est-ce que nous, les Français, on est capables de faire une évaluation sérieuse de l'affaire du Sahel en distinguant le début où on répond, on a raison, à l'appel au secours du Mali et des pays autour pour stopper l'offensive sur Bamako, et le fait là aussi de rester trop longtemps avec de bonnes intentions pour assurer la sécurité dans le Sahel, ce qui est complètement impossible. Donc je trouve qu'il y a pas mal de cas, en dehors du cas particulièrement horrible et pénible de la Russie et de l'Ukraine, sur lequel on doit avoir le courage de réfléchir, parce que le monde réel, c'est le monde du vote à l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, où il y a 140 pays qui ont condamné la Russie, c'est normal, hein, l'agression est évidente, mais il y a 40 pays qui ont refusé de condamner, qui ont refusé de prendre parti. Et ils représentent en gros 60% de l'humanité. Parce que dedans, il y a la Chine, bien sûr, mais il y a aussi de l'Inde, l'Indonésie, 20 ou 25 pays d'Afrique. C'est la réapparition du non-alignement. Donc l'idée qu'à partir de la fin de l'URSS, sous le pseudonyme de communauté internationale, on contrôle et on gouverne tout, c'est pas vrai. Alors c'est triste à dire, c'est pénible, mais il faut qu'on intègre cet élément-là. Et les 40 pays, ce n'est pas des partisans de Poutine, hein. Il y a plein de gens là-dedans qui trouvent Poutine atroce et qui ne sont pas pro-russes, mais ils ne veulent pas être automatiquement de notre côté. Et quand on parle des fameuses valeurs, ils nous disent oui, d'accord, mais il y a énormément de cas où vous-même, les Occidentaux, vous avez violé vos valeurs et il ne s'est rien passé. Donc c'est ça le monde réel. Donc si on veut tirer toutes les leçons et être préparé à d'autres menaces dangereuses, je crois qu'il faut intégrer tout ça. D'autant que la Russie ne sera jamais une social-démocratie scandinave. Jamais. Ça sera toujours compliqué et différent. Je ne sais pas quand ça se passera, sans doute après Poutine, peut-être même avec Poutine, j'en sais rien, dans longtemps. Pas maintenant, pas demain, après-demain, etc. Mais on se retrouvera à nouveau, en tout cas nous les Européens, tout à côté de la Russie. Qu'est-ce qu'on fera? Est-ce qu'on arrivera à réinventer la coexistence pacifique? Il faut se rappeler que pendant la guerre froide, quand les deux entités se menaçaient d'anéantissement tous les matins, avec des assassinats beaucoup plus nombreux que les assassinats de la Russie en Grande-Bretagne, il y a eu des bras de fer gagnés par l'Occident. C'est l'Occident qui a gagné la guerre froide. Au bord du gouffre, avec un courage et une intelligence stratégique énorme, Cuba, la crise de Cuba, Kennedy, mais en laissant des portes de sortie. Je n'en tire pas une leçon pour aujourd'hui parce que je ne vois pas du tout la porte de sortie qu'on pourrait laisser à Poutine. D'ailleurs, je ne crois pas du tout une négociation sur quoi que ce soit. Mais rappelez-vous qu'après Cuba, qu'est-ce qui avait poussé Khrouchtchev à mettre des missiles à Cuba? C'est que l'Amérique avait mis des missiles en Turquie qui pouvaient toucher Moscou en quelques minutes. Donc Khrouchtchev s'est dit, je vais faire la même chose, je vais leur coller des missiles à côté. Il a dû reprendre ses missiles parce que Kennedy était plus fort. Mais Kennedy lui avait promis de retirer les missiles de Turquie, à condition que ça demeure secret. C'est resté secret, il a retiré les missiles. Alors, à la limite, Khrouchtchev, c'est moins compliqué à gérer, même à l'époque, que Poutine aujourd'hui. Donc je ne compare pas les deux. Et sur l'Ukraine, moi, je ne vois pas du tout de scénario de solution. On peut imaginer que les combats s'arrêtent, que Poutine déclare, invente qu'il a atteint ses objectifs, en redéfinissant ses objectifs, et que les combats s'arrêtent, avec des affrontements sporadiques. Mais même dans ce cas de figure qui serait moins pire pour les malheureux Ukrainiens, il n'y a pas de négociation possible. Je ne vois pas quel Ukrainien pourrait entériner ça. Jamais ils pourront accepter. Je ne parle même pas de la Crimée, mais le Donbass, ils ne peuvent pas accepter. Donc il n'y a pas de solution. Donc moi je m'attends, j'espère me tromper, je m'attends à un conflit gelé, enquisté, mais pas complètement gelé, une sorte d'abcès purulent qui nous oblige à donc faire complètement l'impasse sur la relation avec la Russie et qui nous impose alors deux choses. Le renforcement de l'OTAN qu'on aurait dû avoir et de la dimension européenne qui est indispensable. Il faut que les Américains comprennent enfin que s'il n'y a pas une remotivation des Européens, un engagement avec une vraie place dans le système de sécurité, pas simplement pour acheter des avions américains, mais une vraie place dans la décision, et on va perdre le soutien populaire, ça, dans la durée. Mais je serais tout à fait favorable, moi, à un système très, très, très dissuasif. Et d'ailleurs, je sais que vous avez travaillé pour cette administration, mais je ne veux pas vous gêner, mais quand Trump émettait des doutes sur l'article 5, c'était un message catastrophique. Puisqu'on est dans la période... Autant je pense que... Donc on n'a pas été assez inclusif pendant 15 ans et pas assez dissuasif dans les 15 années récentes. C'est à ce moment-là qu'il aurait fallu dire l'article 5 s'appliquera quoi qu'il arrive. S'il y a juste un mètre carré dans un pays de l'OTAN qui est menacé, l'article 5 s'applique. Il fallait le dire, le manifester et renforcer avant, ce qui est fait maintenant. Dernier exemple, et puis je vais m'arrêter après, d'aberration stratégique occidentale, c'est la décision du sommet de Bucarest en 2008, je crois. C'est le sommet où on dit l'Ukraine a vocation à être dans l'OTAN, ce qui est insupportable pour les Russes, surtout à cause de Sébastopol, mais pas tout de suite. Alors ça, vraiment, c'est ce que l'Occident peut faire de pire, parce que vous avez la provocation pour la Russie qui est en train de redevenir un animal enragé, et pas de protection. Donc soit il fallait dire l'Ukraine est dans l'OTAN, c'est comme ça, point. Mais il y a une négociation séparée sur le traité sur Sébastopol, et la Russie garde Sébastopol comme l'Amérique garde Guantanamo. Et c'est pas fait à l'époque. Ou alors il fallait appliquer ce que disait Brzezinski à la fin, polonais, bon, tout le monde connaît Brzezinski, qui est un immense stratège sur beaucoup de plans en Afghanistan et ailleurs, qui les dernières années était contre l'entrée de l'Ukraine dans l'OTAN, les dernières années de sa vie. Il pensait qu'il fallait, à la place, bâtir un système de sécurité, croisé, partagé. Mais est-ce que c'était possible? Sans doute trop tard, parce que l'OTAN n'aurait pas suffi, et la Russie ne s'y serait pas mêlée. Enfin bon, il a dit ça très tard. À mon avis, c'était très intelligent si on l'avait fait au début des années 90. Tout à fait au début. Bon, bref, à mon avis, beaucoup d'erreurs qui ne se ramènent pas au fait d'avoir sous-estimé l'obsession ukrainienne de Poutine, assez répandue chez les Russes. Hein. Ce que disait Solzhenitsyn n'était pas très différent, en réalité, sur l'Ukraine. Il aurait certainement été contre la guerre et contre la violence, etc. Mais il y a quand même tout un courant de pensée, c'est pas que Poutine. Il y a un courant de pensée, il y a un nationalisme outragé, on peut ricaner en disant c'est de leur faute, tout ce qu'on veut, mais enfin, ça existe. Ça existe. Donc il faut intégrer tout ça et avoir un système maintenant très dissuasif, très clair, sans maximalisme. Moi, je suis très, très heureux quand je vois que l'Amérique et les autres disent on fera tout ce qu'il faut pour que la Russie ne puisse pas gagner en Ukraine, pour que l'Ukraine réussisse à gagner contre cette attaque. Et quand j'entends que ça va au-delà et qu'il faut en profiter pour aller affaiblir la Russie, je pense que c'est irresponsable, intenable. Et quand on va sur ce terrain, les opinions occidentales vont se disloquer. Et si on va au point où on dépasse la co-belligérance, on est juste avant nous. Et on va au-delà, aucun parlement en Occident ne votera la guerre. Aucun. Donc c'est irresponsable de parler sur cette ligne. Il faut avoir la ligne la plus ferme et la plus dure et la plus dissuasive possible, mais pas jusque-là. Parce qu'il faut qu'elle soit tenable. On ne peut pas faire à Poutine le cadeau de montrer un Occident qui se disloque. Ça n'a pas été le cas récemment, parce que le sommet des 7 était bien, le sommet de l'OTAN s'est passé correctement en termes d'homogénéité. Mais il faut qu'on intègre les étapes suivantes. Et après qu'on tienne bon. On tienne bon. Et un jour, il y a 15-20 millions de Russes, je ne sais pas, qui, je m'arrête là, 15-20 millions de Russes qui espéreront que leur Russie puisse vivre, non pas sous la coupe des Occidentaux, mais à l'occidental. Donc il faut être prêt pour ce jour-là, mais ce n'est pas l'urgence. L'urgence, c'est d'aider l'Ukraine à résister.
Well, we promised you different points of view, and I think that's what you're getting on the panel. And I think it undermines, we can't talk about Europe. There isn't Europe. There's Western Europe and a point of view there, and then there are the nations of the Baltics and Eastern Europe and Central Europe with some very different points of view. I was waiting for someone to bring up the role of the United States. Thank you. I know that we only have Dr. Babst for just a couple more minutes, so I'm going to go to her. I do have you for a couple more minutes, right? Yes, okay. The minister brought up the question of deterrence and mentioned NATO and the United States. How much of our strategic blindness was due to Europe simply free-riding off the United States? We had very few nations take NATO seriously, its spending commitments seriously. They built up massive social welfare programs, and they took vacations in August. Maybe they were expecting the United States to do something because the Baltic nations are too small, and maybe the rich nations of the West were simply too lazy. Can you respond to that, if you like, Doctor, or to the two ministers and their comments?
Yes, of course. I mean, you're putting your finger at a very obvious weak point when looking at Europeans' ability and political preparedness to really invest into defense and to stick to the commitment that they had made collectively at the Wales summit back then in 2014. But the picture is a little bit more nuanced, obviously. A number of nations started to really pick up and started to invest more. They also were more prepared in terms of increasing defense cooperation on the European Union side. We had, 2-3 years ago, initiatives on the European Union side, which we still have, called PESCO and CARD. You're aware of these projects, all aimed at helping the Europeans to not only spend more, but also spend smarter, really develop capabilities jointly. Admittedly, now that some 8 years have passed, I think the overall picture is still mixed. On the European Union side, looking at the CARDS and PESCO projects, we have made some progress, but they are still far from having generated the real high capability, high ends that we need to have, especially now, once looking at 300,000 combat-ready deployable troops that we want to send across our frontiers. And a number of nations, as the Secretary General has pointed out, have already started to meet the 2% market. So yes, Europeans were slow. Europeans talked a lot. Defense industrial bases are still fragmented across countries. So there is a lot still to do. Could the current war serve as a wake-up call? We've already had a couple of wake-up calls in the past, starting all the way from 9/11 to you name it. And every single time Europeans pledged that they were more prepared to spend on defense and to modernize their capabilities than before. This time I'm slightly more optimistic, simply because the threat has become so imminent and really closer to our borders. And it's also easier for policymakers, including, again, in my own country, to make that point why, for instance, Germany has decided to spend this extra money of 100 million on the Bundeswehr, on defense capabilities, etc. pp. But the challenge politically will be to sustain that. This is not a once-in-a-lifetime type of event. We are in here for the long haul. And so I think policymakers will have to struggle quite a bit in order to make that point in a year from now, 2 years from now, and 3 years from now, how long it will take. But I wanted to quickly, if I may, since I have the word, respond to what Foreign Minister Juppé just said about have we overlooked Russia or feeling humiliated and pushed aside during some point. I agree, it makes sense to also look back at that part of our history closely. I can only offer you my own insights because I sat in NATO-Russia councils for 12 years, as long as they existed. I led a couple of these NRC projects. I attended Bucharest summits and the like. And I also recall, the Obama-Clinton reset Russia policy that we adopted in 2009. And that was even after Georgia, after Russia occupied Southeast Asia. So I think we have given collectively a lot of offers to the Russians, a lot of avenues to start connecting to us, a lot of what we put on the table to start working together collectively. And for some years, it seemed to work quite okayish, but at some point, at least it was my impression, the Russians at NATO, the Russian ambassadors at NATO, and my former Russian colleagues, they started to disconnect. And they started to really look at the world, at our partnership in a very different way. And we missed that point and weren't really able to bring them back, possibly also because their viewpoints on their national security interests became so much different than what we were prepared to accept.
Thank you.
Stop here.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Minister, I'd love for you to react, but I'd also maybe like to ask you kind of a provocative question, because your colleague, Minister Vidrine, also mentioned Africa, other parts of the world that we simply just don't care about. And we're not honest about that. We say we care. We say we want Ukraine to win. But, our sanctions aren't so tough and we're not arming them quickly. The rhetoric is great. But, do we really care? Is that the source of the strategic blindness? The realism that actually we care about ourselves and it's a dog-eat-dog world?
Do we care enough about Ukraine winning, you mean?
Meaning, were we strategically blind, and did we appease Putin because we simply didn't care enough? We didn't want to expend the political capital, the resources, the pressure on the European nations to meet their NATO commitments? Isn't it easier just to slide by until they actually threaten us personally?
Well, I would probably start with as Minister said, a lack of accommodation policy towards Russia. And I wanted to start where the professor finished her remark about everything that has been done to accommodate Russia. Again, from Baltic perspective, it looks as if we took all the steps that could accommodate Russia to the point where we are no longer being taken seriously. Professor mentioned NATO-Russia Council, the agreements in '97 that basically defined how the eastern flank could be defended, and now it's actually changing, and it was changing in Madrid. So after '97, how much time did it have to pass? All the horrific events that Russia participated in that did not change the stance from the West. When it comes to European Union, in 2014 I was elected a member of European Parliament. That was just or during the first war in Ukraine, and Federica Mogherini was then the High Representative in European Commission, and she was busy preparing the cooperation document that defined a cooperation area that was called From Lisbon to Vladivostok. So that was the mood. With all the belligerent speak and talks coming from Moscow, we still were talking about the cooperation. So the question is probably not whether did we or did we not accommodate Russia enough. I think the question should be posed, did we prepare ourselves for the eventuality that Russia will challenge us? And that is, again, and that was very well spoken during the first panel. Russia it's not just about the war against Ukraine. It's not the war in Georgia. It's that the way that Putin and his regime sees a global world order. And I think just yesterday, Putin gave a speech that basically and admitted very openly that this is what's being challenged. This is what's being rewritten. The liberal consensus, if you might, or liberal world order. He called it American-run world order. So this is what's being rewritten. And now the question remains to us, are we ready to defend it? Or, as Ambassador Dan said, are we going to flagellate us and say that we did not do something enough to Russia? I think that the only thing that we did not do enough is to prepare ourselves. And that's why so many of us today are frightened when we hear Putin speak. That's why we're so much afraid when he says that he will not let the grain pass through the Black Sea, and we're unable to check him. That's why there are capitals in the European Union who are so afraid of what's going to happen because the sanctions are being imposed on the traffic from Belarus to Kaliningrad. That's why we're afraid, because we're not ready. And if one thing needs to be changed here is for us to get ready as soon as possible and not look what could we have done to accommodate Russia better. Because we did everything, and everything was done, but it was not to Russia's liking, because this is not what they were looking for.
Thank you, Minister. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I really want to open it up to the questions from the audience. I just have one request. Please, your name, your affiliation, and no speeches, just a question. Because I want to get as many people in here as possible to ask questions of this esteemed panel. We've got a question from the gentleman just here. Yes, sir. Yes. Name, affiliation, and question, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Enrico Marani. I'm a recent graduate from the College of Europe. And my question for Mrs. Kissel is Natum momentum and future gonna survive a potential upcoming Donald Trump presidency, or what's your opinion on this? And for Mr. Vidier, my question is France ready for a European Union defense system? Thank you.
Thanks. The panel isn't about me, I'm just moderating. But I'll give you one piece of data. Out of the last 4 presidential administrations, there was only one where Putin did not invade another nation. That was Donald Trump. There was one where we sanctioned his inner circle and undermined him via energy sanctions, and where we had unanimous NATO consent to withdraw from the INF Treaty to exact some actual punishment when he violated a treaty. But I'll turn it over to the Minister for the second question. Minister. It was to Monsieur Vidry?
No?
No. Can you repeat the question, sir?
Is France ready for a European Union defense system?
Is France ready for a European Union defense system?
On ne peut pas répondre en une minute à cette question. Je sais que depuis que la France propose qu'il y ait une défense européenne plus forte, ou qui existe depuis longtemps, avec beaucoup plus d'énergie sous le président Macron, il y a eu énormément d'obstacles. D'abord, tout le système Pentagone d'OTAN dit non, pour commencer. Les autres Européens disent on ne veut pas, ça coûte trop cher, c'est dangereux, et nos sociétés veulent du social et pas de la défense. Et les gouvernements ont de moins en moins de marge de manœuvre par rapport à l'opinion, en réalité. Et nos amis polonais, baltes, etc., disent c'est très dangereux parce que si on donne aux Américains l'impression qu'on est capable de se défendre par nous-mêmes, ben, ils vont se retirer. Alors c'est l'inverse. Il faut qu'ils restent absolument. Il ne faut d'ailleurs pas qu'ils soient obsédés trop par la Chine, parce qu'il faut d'abord nous dépendre nous. Donc la question n'est pas française. Hein. La question que vous posez, elle concerne tout le monde. La France n'a sans arrêt fait des propositions, à mon avis, très légitimes et justifiées. Alain Juppé, qui est là, en a fait lui-même, mais ça n'a jamais été soutenu. Donc il y a une synthèse à trouver, puisque tout le monde, Poutine a ressuscité l'Alliance Atlantique, tout le monde ici en est très heureux. Il faut que les Américains, les Polonais et autres comprennent que pour que ce soit durable, il faut l'adhésion des populations, un soutien de la population. Et l'épouvantail Poutine ne suffira pas. Il faut une adhésion, que les gens comprennent que c'est légitime, que c'est utile, etc. Et que les Européens ont un rôle là-dedans, pas simplement une fonction. Et qu'en matière d'industrie européenne, en matière d'armement européen, les Européens trouvent une place normale. Donc il faut gérer cet aspect-là, et pas une singularité française, et ne pas se contenter de la menace poutinienne. Mais ça, c'est un vieux débat, ça n'a aucun rapport avec l'Ukraine, en fait. Attendez, j'en profite pour dire que, à mon avis, les Baltes n'ont rien à se reprocher. S'il y a des pays qui on ne peut faire aucune critique, dont les erreurs pas assez inclusives, pas assez dissuasives, ce n'est pas les Baltes. Et dans leur position, ce qu'ils disent est absolument logique. Et les Américains auraient dû plus nettement, depuis des années, dire la frontière de l'OTAN commence là. Pas simplement en 2022, mais avant. En revanche, il n'y a pas de, cher ami ministre, il n'y a pas de consensus libéral-libertaire. Il n'y en a plus dans les démocraties. Regardez la situation aux États-Unis, en Grande-Bretagne, en France un peu aussi, il n'y a plus de consensus là-dessus. Et la vraie menace pour les démocraties, ce n'est pas Poutine. C'est le fait que dans les démocraties, il y a une majorité de gens qui ne veulent plus être représentés. En tout cas, pas représentés par des partis de gouvernement. Et ça existerait même si Poutine n'avait pas déclenché cette horrible guerre. Voilà, j'en profite.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question in the back. Yes, sir, that's you. If we can get a microphone. Name, affiliation, and question, please. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Tobias Winkelset. I'm a fellow from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And my question goes to Mr. Vidouin. I think you pointed out a very interesting point that when we look at the Ukrainian-Russian conflict right now, the mainly parts of Asia and Africa and also South America don't want to take side. Yeah, why is that? Yeah, why do they don't want to take side to the West? So is it important that when we look in the future that we don't think about the way we treated Russia in the past, but also to have a little bit more self-criticism in how we treated all other countries in the world and maybe learn from this as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to also, I'd like all three panelists, if they can, to respond. Let's do a lightning round. Monsieur Vidouin.
Mais la réponse est dans la question. Il a déjà répondu à la question.
I would probably agree with the minister. From a practical standpoint, it is quite interesting to see the Western reaction when we found out the United Nations votes. I was at the time, it happened so, coincidentally actually, at least from my part, I was in New Delhi. And I was among, I don't know how many Western countries who were visiting New Delhi at that point. And there were officials, because it was a conference, and there were quite a lot of Indian officials that would, sneer at this. And they say, where the people were half a year ago, where they were 5 years ago. Why suddenly, when we vote, somehow, well, that you do not like, that you said all of a sudden you start coming to the capital. And truly, I think that it is a lesson that we should learn from. Did we lose on certain partnerships? I think that yes, we lost. Why? I don't know. We did not care. We did not see the need. Maybe we thought that it's already going, everything is fine. And then, but there is no political partnerships with the potential partners, either in North Africa, in Middle East, in Africa, and in many other regions, where we had to build more meaningful partnerships. And obviously, for some countries, it is quite difficult because of the past. And I would be very, very honest with you. But then again, there are countries who don't have this, who don't have a very difficult past, who were colonized as well. And I mean, those countries can build and rebuild many things that were lost. politically as well, not just from the practical trade perspective.
Dr. Babst?
The thing that crosses my mind while listening to you is that I think I recall between 2016 all the way to 2020, giving at least 5 or 6 presentations to members of the North Atlantic Councils on Council in Brussels on Russia's outreach in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the importance of the BRICS, the setup of institutions, military cooperation, Wagner troops, and the like. So the picture, I mean, that I tried to point the ambassadors to had always the same result, which was, look at what they're doing. There is a plan behind. They're doing this very systematically. They're doing this very also systematically in tandem with China. And what is it that we do? Simply sit back and watch? The answer was basically yes. That explains possibly, I mean, that now, I mean, President Putin can nicely rely on this, if I say, political investment that he has made for a number of years already. Whereas our partnerships, be it with the BRICS country, or be it with African countries, or be it with Middle Eastern countries, is very, very complicated. It's very complex. It's not straightforward. And yeah, so it's very hard to make that point that we are making right now.
Thank you. Sorry this is such a depressing panel. I'd like to go to the gentleman right here. Yes, sir. Please wait for the mic because we have people online who are watching us. Thank you. We've got 6 minutes. I want to get a couple more questions in, so we'll do this fast.
Bonjour, c'est Pascal Bruckner, intellectuel français, c'est-à-dire spécialiste du vague. Une question pour Hubert Védrine. Étant donné votre analyse que je partage globalement, si vous étiez au pouvoir, que feriez-vous concrètement pour l'Ukraine, pour les livraisons d'armes, pour les conseils stratégiques?
Je l'ai déjà dit, c'est que je pense qu'il faut aller au maximum, mais pas la co-belligérance. Sinon, ça va se disloquer. On ne peut pas en démocratie entrer en guerre comme ça, il faut un vote. Et si on va à la co-belligérance, précisément, aucun parlement démocratique ne votera la guerre, ni en France, ni ailleurs. Donc il faut s'arrêter juste avant. Donc des fournitures d'armes, très bien, l'aide aux réfugiés, très bien, l'aide financière, très bien, l'aide à la reconstruction, très bien, mais ne pas encourager sans arrêt les Ukrainiens à réattaquer, parce que le rapport de force... Donc il ne faut pas se battre jusqu'au dernier Ukrainien non plus. Hein. Bon, il y a une ligne de crête. Je trouve que ce qui est fait est plutôt correct. Hein. Mais je suis plutôt d'accord avec ce que fait le président Macron, avec le chancelier Scholz. C'est également la position italienne, je crois. Et en plus, je trouve que la synthèse a été trouvée dans la réunion de l'OTAN. Donc ça veut dire continuer durablement, et se préparer à quelque chose qui est sans solution prévisible.
Thank you. Laura? Oh, we need the microphone, please.
Okay,
Can we get a mic?
Non, parce que...
Excusez-moi.
Oui, je voulais juste rajouter une question à la question de Pascal Bruckner sur justement la politique du président Macron. Comment vous évaluez le fait qu'il ait continué, malgré l'échec flagrant de ses premières tentatives, un dialogue avec le président Poutine? Est-ce que cela n'a pas été le contraire d'une approche productive et une sorte finalement d'humiliation pour la France, et en même temps de quelque chose qui a semé le doute chez ses alliés, notamment à l'Est, en Ukraine, chez les pays baltes, chez les Polonais, etc.
D'abord, je m'interdis d'évaluer, comme vous dites. Vous l'entendez? Je m'interdis d'évaluer ce que font les présidents ou les ministres. Depuis que je ne suis plus au gouvernement, ce serait d'une prétention excessive. Deuxièmement, je crois qu'il a eu raison de garder le contact, pas dans l'espoir que ça règle des problèmes insolubles tout de suite, mais comme un négociateur du GIGN garde le contact. Troisièmement, ça n'a servi à rien, c'est évident. Bon, très bien. Mais on ne peut pas lui reprocher. Il n'y a absolument rien dans la situation épouvantable actuelle en Ukraine et en Europe qui soit lié à ça. Donc on ne peut pas dire c'est parce que Macron a voulu parler à Poutine, qu'il a traité avec des involtures, etc. Non, il n'y a aucun lien entre les deux. Donc on peut dire ça ne servi à rien, c'est dommage. Peut-être qu'un jour, les Ukrainiens eux-mêmes auront besoin de trouver quelqu'un qui puisse parler. Mais je ne pense pas qu'on puisse, à partir de là, bâtir un système critique. Et par ailleurs, je n'évalue pas, je me l'interdis.
Okay. We have just one more question, so please make it good. Okay, we have a very energetic hand waving on this side, but please, I want all three to answer this question and we'll wrap up. Thank you.
It will be fast, I've tried. So, my name is Olivier Zans, and I have a question. I think Hubert Védrine put his finger on something very significant. That is, in pointing out the disaffection and the crisis of democracy from the standpoint of the population at large. I'm a historian. I have a clear sense of the fight that many generations have fought one after the other to vote. And now I see many people not exercising this right and think they are right in doing so. So my question is, when will the international crisis and the war be sufficiently bad to stimulate public opinion to react and exercise its democratic function to participate?
Thank you. Hard to do a lightning round after that question. Monsieur Védrine, Minister Védrine, you.
On ne va pas réinventer la démocratie en une minute. Hein. Enfin, le vrai problème est interne. Il faut que les démocraties fonctionnent et refassent la preuve de leur efficacité. Et qu'on ne parle pas sans arrêt de combat de valeurs, parce que c'est-à-dire combat de religion. Si c'est combat de religion, c'est sans merci, sans solution. Et avec le rapport de force mondiale, je ne sais pas qui gagne. Bon voilà, donc je ne vais pas développer la question. Un dernier mot, excusez-moi, en une phrase. Il ne faut pas renoncer à envoyer des messages au peuple russe. Même s'il y a Poutine, même si le peuple russe est derrière Poutine, en majorité, il y a certainement 15 à 20 millions de Russes qui sont désespérés, épouvantés, qui se taisent. Donc il faut envoyer des messages disant un jour, je ne sais pas quand, on voudrait retrouver une Russie avec laquelle on peut travailler. Ce n'est pas le cas du tout aujourd'hui. Ça vous paraît absurde, mais c'est le principe de la bouteille à la mer. Après tout, on met bien des messages dans les satellites pour les extraterrestres. Donc on peut envoyer un message au peuple russe en plus.
We'll go to Dr. Babs, and then we'll end with the Lithuanian Foreign Minister. Doctor.
I'm concerned that, again, speaking just for the country where I'm located in, I already see a certain degree of Ukraine fatigue, and we are only 5 months into this war. So I remain obviously concerned when I look at the next weeks and months ahead. I cannot, like the minister just said, answer the question about how we invigorate democratic credibility in a minute, but I think it will boil down to, most likely, the issue of leadership. I think what ordinary people would like to hear from their respective governments is that A, they're not scared. Yeah, they're not scared, but instead they have a plan. A very concrete plan, I mean, to take the respective country and their populations through this crisis, with all the ramification that the crisis comes along with. And yeah, I mean, again, looking at my country, we had a pretty stumbling start. Now it has become a little bit clearer, but yeah, communicating clearly and precisely, and portraying, or rather conveying, I mean, that the government has a plan seemed to be, I think, helpful for the ordinary citizen to grasp. I mean, what is it really that we are in?
Thank you. Minister, final word.
Thank you. Well, if we are to wait for the public to give a mandate for something that requires leadership, then we'll be too late. When it comes to vital decisions, unfortunately, it's either we act or we don't. And I understand that it boils down to elections, and I understand that we are all, I'm elected official, I'm a member of parliament, I know how that works. But in some cases, who are very important, one has to be ready to lose. And it happens in politics, fortunately.
Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. And thank you, Doctor. Thank you.